Good morning to each and everyone. I am teacher Marc Villacora, a teacher 1 from Tubud Central Elementary School, and I'm going to present my study, Improving Learners' Procedural Skills and Conceptual Understanding in Integers through Dienes' Dynamic Principle. Mathematics is accepted as the partner of science in improving one's knowledge. It plays a great role in any field of knowledge, for it solves the numeric problems that may help in acquiring new set of invention. It is known to be the backbone of science. Even the amazing works of engineers, architects, technologists, and in all other fields of knowledge are greatly associated with the concept of mathematics. A part of the vision of the Department of Education is to continuously improve itself to better serve its stakeholders. From the traditional way to more effective teaching strategies and approach, and every possible means were used by the institution just to improve the performance of the learner. But despite the dream of the Filipinos to enhance the curriculum, the learners still fail to achieve competencies in the curriculum guide. In fact, in Tubud Central Elementary School, as per the error analysis done by the teachers per grading examination, in mathematics 128 in average failed the exam and 80 in average passed the examination. Now, one of the least mastered concepts or competencies by the learners is the concept of integers. However, study reveals that mastery in integers is important for laying the foundation of various other topics to be covered in the future, like algebra. And also, basic concepts and operations involving integers are among the math concepts that are most difficult to understand, according to some studies. Although integers is a math topic, they are frequently used to represent many real-world situations such as temperature, profits, losses of money, and location. According to many studies, in mastering mathematical concepts like integers, both procedural skills and conceptual understanding are needed. This is because procedural skill is the cognitive process of following the mathematical procedures efficiently and appropriately, while conceptual understanding is the skill to evaluate the correctness of an example or procedure to providing, or shall we say, providing definitions and explanations of concepts in mathematics. Now, cognizant to the conducted studies, it is imperative for teachers to employ strategies in their class that will both improve the conceptual understanding and procedural skills of the learners with concrete materials that are faded into abstract representations. One of the best proven strategies to employ this is to implement Dienes' dynamic principle. This is because Dienes considers the learning of concept of mathematics as a process which covers abstraction, generalization, and transfer. Although he seems to have largely adopted Piaget's views, Dienes contributed significantly to the cognitive psychological views on learning mathematics. He asserted that teaching of mathematical concepts one should make more use of manipulative materials and play. He developed a theory which focused on the use of discovery-type activities and learner-centered manipulative materials. Being a learner-centered pedagogy, Dienes' dynamic principle offers a promising result in terms of fostering conceptual understanding and procedural skills of pupils in mathematics. So with this, the researcher used this approach to improve the learner's performance in mathematics, most especially on the concept of integers. Now, here are my research questions. Before and after the intervention, what is the performance in terms of procedural skills on adding and subtracting integers of learners who are exposed to Dienes' dynamic principle, and letter B, not exposed to Dienes' dynamic principle? Before and after the intervention, what is the level of conceptual understanding in the mathematical concepts on adding and subtracting integers of learners who are A, exposed to the Dienes' dynamic principle, and B, not exposed to the Dienes' dynamic principle? Number 3, is there a significant difference between the pre-test and post-test scores of learners exposed and unexposed to Dienes' dynamic principles in terms of procedural skills and conceptual understanding? Number 4, is there a significant difference in the procedural skill on adding and subtracting integers between learners exposed to Dienes' dynamic principle and those who are not exposed to Dienes' dynamic principle? And number 5, is there a significant difference in conceptual understanding on adding and subtracting integers between learners exposed to Dienes' dynamic principles and those who are not exposed to Dienes' dynamic principle? So, for the scope and limitations of this study, for the research locale, the researcher conducted a study into Bud Central Elementary School and Kakay Rinabor Elementary School using grade 6 learners as participants of the study. The sample size is 99. So, the sampling procedure is purposive sampling in selecting the 99 grade 6 learners from the different schools. And for the research design, Thru experimental research design was used because randomization was utilized. For the research instrument, there are 2 research instruments, the integer procedural skill test and integer conceptual understanding test. So the integer procedural skill test was used to assess the procedural skills of the learners, and the other one made to assess the conceptual understanding. As for the integer procedural skill test, or IPST, it consisted of 10 equation items in which learners were tasked to solve. On the other hand, the integer conceptual understanding test consisted 10 items, 2-tiered multiple choice test. On the first tier, learners were asked to choose the letter of the correct answer and provide reasons or solutions on the second tier. As part of the data analysis, the data gathered were used and analyzed using statistical package for social science version 20.0 or SPSS 20.0. The following were the treatment made for the data. First is arithmetic mean. It measured the overall level of procedural skills of learners on adding and subtracting integers of the experimental group and control groups. For the frequency, distribution, and percentage, this was used to know the distribution of the level of conceptual understanding on adding and subtracting integers of the experimental and control groups. And for the paired t-test, this was used to determine the significant difference between the pre-test and post-test scores of learners in the experimental group and control group. And analysis of covariance was used to determine the significant difference in the procedural skill and conceptual understanding on adding and subtracting integers between the experimental group and control groups. In the conduct of the study, the researcher first had ethical consideration protocols. The researcher first sent the letter to the superintendent asking permission to conduct the study. Then, the researcher let the participants sign an informed consent stating the purpose of the study and that their participation is voluntary. They were briefed that they are free to back out anytime they want. More so, parental consent was given to their parents, indicating the important conditions and guidelines in the conduct of the study because they were still minors. Next, the assessment tools were validated by 2 expert and pilot tested to 90 grade 6 learners from sections Adelpha and Dendrobium, after which they were reliability tested using the KR20 of SPSS version 20. Then, pre-test was done. Both groups were given pre-test, after which the intervention was implemented, and after the intervention, both groups were given the post-test, and the results of the post-test were analyzed using statistical treatment. So, on the case of employing Dienes' dynamic principle, the experimental group underwent 3 learning episodes, the in-play, semi-structured, and structured episodes, to bridge the gap between the real world and the integers concept. In the in-play learning episode, concretion was done for learners come in contact with manipulatives that will serve as their toy. In teaching addition and subtraction of integers, they were given an apparatus with a certain number of blue and red beads that they are going to match, after which they were tasked to remove the matched beads, and the teacher employed this activity as a game. Next, in the semi-structured learning episode, representation occurred for the teacher assigned signs to the beads and introduced the improvised number line. Just like this. This is the improvised number line. This time, the teacher involved signed numbers during the activity and let the learners make equations out of these signed numbers. And lastly, in the structured learning episode, the teacher solicited ideas from the learners on what adding and subtracting integers rules have they formed based on the equations they made. Then the teacher presented different equations and mathematical problems to reinforce the learners' made rules on adding and subtracting integers. Hence, abstraction happened through the activities done in the in-play and semi-structured learning episodes. Now let's go to results and discussion. Okay, so my problem number 1 is all about the research question number 1. So before and after the intervention, what is the performance in terms of procedural skills on adding and subtracting integers of learners who are exposed to the Dienes dynamic principle and not exposed to Dienes dynamic principle? So the procedural skills in adding and subtracting integers of learners in the control and experimental groups in the IPST is depicted in this table. So during the pre-test, the 2 control groups and experimental groups are classified as poor procedural skills. In the post-test results, both groups have increased their procedural skill, but control groups 1 and 2 has only reached the category fair, with means of 5.84 and 5.37 respectively. On the other hand, the experimental group has reached the very satisfactory procedural skill with a mean of 8.17. So, for our next problem number 2, before and after the intervention, what is the level of conceptual understanding in mathematical concepts on adding and subtracting integers of learners who are exposed to Dienes dynamic principle and not exposed to Dienes dynamic principle. So the conceptual understanding in adding and subtracting integers of the learners in the control and experimental groups in the ICOT is shown in this table. So according to the pre-test scores of control group 1, it revealed that 11 learners belonged to the incomplete understanding. So, and 20 learners belong to the wrong understanding category, while in control group 2, 1 learner reached the functional understanding category and 11 learners reached the incomplete understanding category, and 18 learners who belonged to the wrong understanding category. Moreover, in experimental group, 1 learner achieved the functional understanding category, 4 of them belonged to incomplete understanding category, and 31 of them belonged to the wrong understanding category in the pre-test. On the other hand, in the post-test results, it showed that in control group 1, 3 learners has reached the partially correct understanding category. Where is it? So, and in control group 2 has achieved functional understanding category. 19 learners. Here it is. 19 learners in control group 2 has achieved functional understanding category. However, learners in the experimental group has improved a lot in their conceptual understanding, wherein 18 and 11 of them have achieved the correct understanding and partially correct understanding category respectively. So that's it. So for the problem number 2. For problem number 3, is there a significant difference between the pre-test and post-test scores of learners exposed and unexposed to Dienes dynamic principle in terms of procedural skills and conceptual understanding? So, according to the paired t-test as shown in this table, there is a significant difference as per the p-value, as we may see, between the pre-test and post-test scores of the learners in the control groups and experimental groups in terms of procedural skills and conceptual understanding. However, it is noteworthy that the procedural skills and conceptual understanding of the experimental group is significantly better than the 2 control groups as shown on their means of their post-test scores. Hence, the learners exposed to Dienes dynamic principle have performed better than those who were not exposed to the strategy. So, for problem number 4, so is there a significant difference in the procedural skill on adding and subtracting integers between learners exposed to Dienes dynamic principles and those who are not exposed to Dienes dynamic principle? So, the analysis of covariance or ANCOVA reveals that there is a significant effect of the between subject factors, factor groups through the p-value, as we can see here, 0.000, which is less than the Cronbach alpha of 0.05. Adjusted mean scores also suggest that the implementation of Dienes dynamic principle is significantly better in enhancing learners' procedural skills compared to traditional method in Group 1 and Control Group 2. Furthermore, 65% of this difference can be attributed to the intervention, which is Dienes' dynamic principle, as we can see in the partial eta squared here, which is 0.647. Problem number 5. Is there a significant difference in conceptual understanding on adding and subtracting integers between learners exposed to Dienes' dynamic principle and those who are not exposed to Dienes' dynamic principle? Again, the result of the test between subject effects in terms of conceptual understanding, as shown on this table using analysis of covariance, revealed that there is a significant effect of the between subjects factor group because, as seen in the p-value, which is 0.000, which is less than the Cronbach alpha of 0.05. Adjusted mean scores also suggest that the implementation of Dienes' dynamic principle was significantly better in enhancing learners' conceptual understanding compared to traditional method in control groups 1 and 2. So we can see here in their adjusted mean score. Furthermore, 66% of this difference can be attributed to Dienes' dynamic principle, as we can see here in the partial eta squared, which is 0.655. Okay, so also results of this study show that Dienes' dynamic principle is an effective approach in improving learners' procedural skills and conceptual understanding in adding and subtracting integers. So this is because exposure to the in-play, semi-structured, and structured learning episodes of this teaching strategy allows learners to concretize abstract mathematical concepts through the use of play and manipulatives, hence enhancing not only their procedural skills but also their conceptual understanding. So with this conclusion, learners are able to solve mathematical equations and problems using different approaches. In fact, in the post-test results of ICOT, it revealed that the learners provided variety of solutions for the mathematical problems they were tasked to solve. Some learners, for example, in example number 1, in question number 1, so this learner solved the mathematical problem using arithmetic. On the other hand, this learner solved the problem using model or the number line. In question number 2, this learner used drawing method, and this learner used arithmetic method. And in problem 4, this learner used arithmetic method, and this learner used drawing or modeling method. So in this sense, we can say that the learner had developed their conceptual understanding because we can see that they have flexible solutions to the same problem. So that is the goal of mathematics, to improve the critical thinking skills and creative thinking skills of learners. Okay, for my recommendations, so based on the result of the study, the researcher would like to recommend the following. Number 1, provide mathematics teachers training on the integration of Dienes' dynamic principle on the mathematics curriculum and urge to use such in their mathematics lessons. Number 2, after the training, monitoring should be done by school heads and supervisors to determine whether the approach has been adopted and implemented effectively in various local settings. Number 3, the effectiveness of Dienes' dynamic principle should be tested in large classes, since some elementary schools have an average class size of 60. Number 4, future researchers should research the effectiveness of Dienes' constructivity, mathematical variability, and perceptual variability principles in teaching mathematical concepts. And that would be all. Thank you and God bless to each one and all. Mabuhay, and I will end my discussion and presentation now. Thank you.